Welcome, everybody. I am very happy to see you here at this webinar, A Climate of Insecurity, African Women Raising Their Voices for Feminist Climate Justice. Before I share any other information with you, I want to let you all know that we have interpretation available today in French and Arabic next to English. So please select now your preferred language at the little globe on the bottom bar on the right-hand side. And I will give people a few moments to choose their language. Okay, great. I'll continue. So now that we're all listening, hopefully in the correct language, I would like to again welcome you all to this webinar, A Climate of Insecurity, African Women Raising Their Voices for Feminist Climate Justice. I'm Katrin Geyer, and I'm WILPF's environmental focal point, and I will be co-moderating this event today with Tamara Lorincz from WILPF Canada and our incoming convener of WILPF's International Environment Working Group. And we will also introduce our amazing panelists in just a moment. We have many people joining from all over the world, so please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat and let us know where you are joining us from. So first off, just a few notes on housekeeping. You can go back one slide, please. So as I said, we have interpretation today in French, English, and Arabic. Please write all of your questions to panelists and speakers in the Q&A function, as we will have a Q&A segment later in this webinar. For all other messages, if you just want to say hi, if you want to say where you're from, if you have any technical questions, please use the normal chat function. We are recording this webinar and we will make it available on WILPF's YouTube channel afterwards. And we are also live streaming this event to WILPF's Facebook page. Next slide, please. Please also amplify our speakers' messages and a discussion today on social media if you feel like it. And you are encouraged to use some of the hashtags such as A Climate of Insecurity, COP27, or WILPF when you tweet, and then we'll look out for the hashtags on Twitter and amplify and retweet those. And just to say, this webinar will be 20 minutes long. And we're almost done with the housekeeping. Next slide, please. So I'm just very briefly going to introduce our panelists. We will first hear from Sylvie Jacqueline Dongmo, who is WILPF's new international president, who will provide some opening remarks. And then we'll hear from our wonderful panelists, Obin, Edwig, and Mpiwa, who will speak each for about 10 minutes about the impacts of the climate crisis in their contexts. And then you will have a chance to ask questions, and we will have about 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A. Before I hand over to my colleague Tamara, I would like to briefly introduce WILPF, as some of you may not be as familiar with the organization. So WILPF is the oldest, oh sorry, you can stop sharing now. Thank you, Rola. Thanks. So WILPF is the oldest feminist peace organization in the world. WILPF is over 100 years old and was founded in the midst of World War I, when over 1,000 women from 12 countries met in The Hague in the Netherlands. And together they created WILPF with a goal to develop mediation strategies to end the war and ultimately eradicate the root causes of war. And I should say that WILPF stands for Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And today, 100 years later, we have 2 offices in Geneva and New York, out of which WILPF's International Secretariat is working. And beyond that, we have 41 sections and 5 groups across Africa, the Americas, South Asia, Asia Pacific, Europe, and the MENA region, where all of us are working for a world of permanent peace built on feminist foundations of freedom, justice, nonviolence, human rights, and equality for all. And as part of this vision, and over 2 decades ago, WILPF has set up the International Environment Working Group that seeks to raise awareness about the links between peace and the environment. And I'm glad to now hand over the floor to Tamara, my co-moderator of today and incoming Environment Working Group convener, who will be able to tell you a little bit more about the Environment Working Group and some of our upcoming priorities. Over to you, Tamara.
Thank you, Katrin, and good afternoon, good evening, and welcome everyone. Bonjour, bonsoir, et bienvenue. Thank you very much for coming. So this webinar has been organized by WILPF's Environment Working Group. It is comprised of members from around the world. The group was established about a decade ago, and it is to support WILPF's advocacy and activism on environment and climate. We raise awareness about the adverse impacts of militarism, war, and armed conflict on the environment and climate, and we look especially at the gender dimensions, and we seek feminist peace solutions. So the Environment Working Group is open to all members. We meet every month. We have an email discussion group that you are welcome to join. We also have a dedicated webpage on the WILPF International website, wilpf.org. Besides hosting meetings and webinars like this one today, we do research and write reports and articles, and many of our members attend UN meetings and conferences, and we also release statements. Our members can get accreditation to attend UN meetings and conferences on environment and climate change through our office. Last spring, for example, we had members attend Stockholm Plus 50, and this November, we will be sending a delegation of 10 WILPF members to the Climate Summit, the Conference of the Parties, COP27, at Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And in the lead up to COP27, we are having a series of webinars to shine a spotlight on climate change and women in Africa. And today is our first one. There will be a couple of more in the next few weeks, so stay tuned. Our webinar today is very well timed because this week is Africa Climate Week, and there is a high-level conference that was just launched yesterday in Gabon in West Africa in preparation for COP27. And at the Gabon conference yesterday, African leaders called for an end to climate injustice, saying the continent causes less than 4% of the global carbon emissions, but pays one of the highest prices for global warming. The president of the Gabon conference, Ali Bongo Ondimba, said 22 million people in the Horn of Africa face starvation because of drought and famine. Countries in the south of the continent are regularly hit by cyclones. Rising sea levels threaten cities such as Dakar, Lagos, Cape Town, and Libreville, and he demanded that the West do more to reduce emissions and contribute to climate finance. So now it's time to listen to African women. In our webinar today, we want to raise and amplify the voices of our sisters across the continent to share their struggles and stories about how climate change is affecting them and what they are doing to seek climate justice. So I am very pleased to introduce Sylvie Jacqueline Dongmo. As of June of this year, Sylvie is the new president of WILPF International, and she will serve a 3-year term. She's an incredible person. She has been a member of the organization for over a decade, and she previously served on WILPF's international board as the Africa representative for many years. She is the founder of WILPF Cameroon and was the section's president. She also coordinated the African Working Group and is a member of the steering committee for the Fund for African Women. Sylvie is a longtime human rights and peace leader with over 27 years experience as a teacher by profession and an African African Union trainer in peace support operations. She has extensive experience advocating for the political and social rights of women both in Africa and around the world. She has an impressive track record on development projects to improve policies, practices, and peace-oriented actions. Sylvie, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamara, for this introduction and for giving me the floor. Dear WILPF members, dear participants, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on your time zone. It is my utmost pleasure to say a few words at the opening of this webinar on the theme, A Climate of Insecurity for COP27, African women raising their voices for feminist climate justice. Permit me to start this very important discussion with these two questions that I put to every one of you. And these questions are just food for thought as we progress in our discussion today. My first question to you is, what is your dream for your country, for your region, and for the world when you think of climate justice? The second question I would like to put to you is, how can we play our role as WILPF members, as women globally, in changing mindsets towards climate justice? As you are aware, as a result of human activity driven by system of operations, including capitalism, patriarchy, militarism, colonialism, just to name a few, climate and environmental destruction now threaten the existence of people, of animals, and the life-giving ecosystem on which we all depend. The adverse impact of climate change continue to overly burden the poorest and the most vulnerable, especially grassroots and poor women, driving deeper inequalities and preventing the attainment of human rights, justice, and peace. Despite growing recognition of the differential vulnerability as well as the unique experiences and skills of women and men bring to development and environmental sustainability efforts, women still have less economic, political, and legal clout, and hence are less able to cope with and are most exposed to the adverse effect of the changing climate. It is very clear that there can be no peace without women, and no peace can be achieved if there is no gender justice or environmental justice. Reason why we believe that peace, gender, and environment are interconnected. Permit me to also say, while regretting it, that women are often not given a voice, but they can be innovative contributors to climate solution. Generally, most grassroots women are excluded and decisions are made for them by the elites. Women are not given opportunities to develop innovative and environmental protecting initiatives. We women have to fight for opportunities through education, access to health, etc. Meanwhile, women do play an important role. They are an important force in enabling, educating the younger generation and shape the future, and they should get more information and knowledge to do that. Women are powerful agents of change and continue to make increasing and significant contributions to sustainable development despite existing structural and sociocultural barriers. I want to end by just trying to give some messages that we can carry home. The first message I want us to carry home is that if you want to make change happen, you have to start by yourself. We are part of this change. It's about ourselves before addressing the other person. The peace that we want to build is only possible when we have climate justice at heart. For this climate justice to become a reality, we women must play a key role. I want to challenge you that we need to take bold steps. In spite of our vulnerability, we women should refuse to be only seen as victims of climate change, but we must decide to be active and effective agents and promoters of adaptation and mitigation. We must fight for women's priorities and needs to be reflected in the development and planning and funding. We should do everything possible to be part of the decision-making at national and local and global level regarding allocation of resources for climate change initiatives. I would like to conclude by saying that by inviting each and every one of you, for those who have not yet done so, to join the WILPF Environment Working Group in order to promote a strong focus on the environment in our work towards feminist peace, as peace, gender, and environment are interconnected. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Sylvie, for your important opening remarks. Your point that women are powerful agents of change need to be emphasized and taken to heart. So thank you so much for that. I am now so pleased to introduce Edwick Madzimure. Edwick is the founding director of WILPF Zimbabwe section. She is a development practitioner with a unique background in rural livelihoods and climate change vulnerabilities. Edwick also engages on humanitarian disarmament activism at the local and national levels. She is on a mission, she says, to transform communities to better include youth and women in the development processes. And Edwick recently represented WILPF at Stockholm Plus 50. And she represents WILPF so well. Edwick, please take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamara. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you WILPF members and the participants. Due to my internet connection, which is not so stable, I will not be sharing my video, so apologies for that. My presentation focuses on the interaction between climate change, rural women's livelihoods, conflicts, and global militarism. The effects of climate change have led to devastating impacts that are exposing women in the global south to challenges such as water scarcity, food insecurity, financial constraints, which are contributing a lot to gender-based violence. Next slide. The world is facing countless global challenges due to climate change, to which marginalized communities who have limited capacity to deal with the climate disasters are bearing the brunt of the effects of climate change. For instance, African rural communities rely more on rain-fed agriculture, which is failing as a result of shifting rainfall patterns, perennial droughts, and floods. Next slide. You realize that trillions of dollars are being channeled into the military investment and wages. A report by CIPRI shows that over $2 trillion were spent by the military industries. Yet the global north countries pledged only $100 billion towards climate change adaptation. Militarism is contributing directly to climate change. Therefore, plans to confront climate change must address militarism, because both climate change and militarism are contributing to human insecurities. Next slide. I want us to have a comparison of how climate change is affecting or is contributing to human insecurity, and how militarism is also contributing to human insecurities. First of all, climate change, like I highlighted earlier on, is contributing to water scarcity, which is affecting most women, especially from the rural areas, because fetching water is their primary role. And as they fetch water from far, they have to walk for long distances looking for water sources, which also poses as a threat to their security. You also look at food insecurity, financial constraints, and as a result of these financial constraints, you realize that most young girls are dropping out of school. They are getting married early, as a result of them trying to escape poverty from their homes. You may ask me why financial constraints as a result of climate change. Most rural communities rely on rain-fed agriculture. So like I highlighted earlier on, rain-fed agriculture is failing as a result of the impacts of climate change, of which agriculture is their main source of livelihood. So as a result of that, you realize that most rural communities are facing financial constraints. Then you also agree with me that the dropping out of school of many young girls will contribute to the widening of inequality gaps and poverty. You also notice that flooding is also contributing to environmental degradation, wars, and conflicts over access to resources. Looking at how militarism is affecting us as the global south, even the global north is also affected. Inequality gaps are also widening. We've got political instability, military repression. Militarism is also fueling conflicts and arms race. You can look at the situation that is happening today between NATO and Russia, the situation in Russia and Ukraine, which is also causing massive environmental degradation. And also some of the global south countries who used to import wheat from Ukraine are also suffering the repercussions of the conflict that is there between Russia and Ukraine. Coming back to Zimbabwe, you realize that most rural communities that live in gold-rich areas are now engaging in artisanal mining as an alternative livelihood. However, the sector is highly militarized. The use of weapons is normalized as a defense mechanism for their livelihood. There are conflicts and tribal wars over access to these gold-rich areas. There are conflicts due to between the farmers and miners over the use of the environment. Farmers blame the miners for polluting rivers with mining chemicals, which are endangering their livestock as well as human beings, because people also rely on rivers as their chief source of water. So you also notice that artisanal miners will also leave gullies behind, which are death traps for the livestock of the farmers. So you realize that conflict between farmers and the miners are order of the day. Women and girls are also facing discrimination. They are also being excluded in the artisanal mining sector because it is believed that their menstrual cycle bring bad luck in the mining sector. So they are not allowed anywhere near the gold extraction shafts. If you find women around the mining sites, they will be carrying trucks that are less profitable. And even for those women that wish to be involved in artisanal mining, like I said earlier on, the use of weapons and violence is very common and is the order of the day, which poses as a not so safe livelihood for women. Next slide, please. So you also notice that the artisanal mining sector, in as much as it is being used as a way or as an alternative livelihood, it is leading to exploitation of women, the abuse of women. So women cannot meaningfully contribute or they cannot meaningfully benefit from the artisanal mining activities in their communities, which is a challenge. So as we are heading to COP27, what are supposed to be our demands? What do we want the COP27 to achieve? We realize that there is really need for long-term conflict solutions, such as disarmament, demilitarization, investment in economic and social rights, and environmental protection. More facilities are supposed to be channeled towards climate change adaptation, mitigation strategies, as well as loss and damage for the developing countries, because you realize that most of the developing countries, they are affected by climate change and they are failing to respond to the effects of climate change as a result of the economic crisis that they are facing. And also, I want you to do your own analysis on who is contributing more to the climate crisis. You realize that it is the militarized industries that are contributing more to climate change. But the most African countries, or should I say most developing countries, are bearing the brunt of the effects of climate change. I would like to thank you all for your attention. I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edwick, for that excellent presentation. And you made crucial points about how climate change and militarism are exacerbating human security and why it's so critical to have disarmament and demilitarization alongside climate mitigation and adaptation. So thank you so much. It is now wonderful to have Obine Sandrine Mada Kepsu of Cameroon join us as a panelist. Obine is a member of WILPF Cameroon and has been focused on environmental and climate change issues for many years. She has a master's degree in applied sciences in development, environment, and natural resource management from the Pan-African Institute for Development in Central Africa. Obine has expertise in environmental protection, waste management, and the circular economy. She is also active on climate justice and peace issues. She has a passion for environmental education and working with young people to create and support environmental clubs in schools. Her goal is to change attitudes and practices in the management of natural resources to prevent conflict and to promote cooperation and climate justice. Obine, please go ahead. Thank you. Obine, you just need to unmute yourself and we can begin the PowerPoint presentation.
Wow. Oui, pardon. Je disais merci beaucoup. Bonsoir à tout le monde. Merci à WILPF qui m'a permis de prendre la parole en ce jour pour m'exprimer sur les questions environnementales. Et dont le thème ce soir intitulé Un climat d'insécurité. Les femmes africaines élèvent leur voix pour la justice climatique féministe. L'objectif de ce travail est de ressortir l'impact du changement climatique dans notre contexte et de façon à montrer comment il s'ajoute à d'autres problèmes d'insécurité alimentaire, des violences sexistes en passant par les conflits et la pollution. Nous avons travaillé sur 3 points principaux. Nous avons fait un contexte, un cadre juridique, les causes profondes du changement climatique, les effets du changement climatique dans notre contexte, les adaptations et quelques recommandations. Next, je ne sais pas si ma présentation est partagée.
Adelaide, are you able to bring up the PowerPoint presentation?
Is Katrin devait, oui.
Katrin is supposed to share it. Katrin, do you have troubles sharing it?
I thought I was sharing it. Let me try again.
Yeah, we will tell you. We were just like in front of a black screen.
Oh.
It is the same issue. Do you see it on your side? Can you see it correctly?
Yes, I can see it. Let me try again. No, okay. One moment. I would try to download the presentation. Apologies. I'm sorry, Obin. I think this will take too long. I will try as you speak to pull it up, but not to waste more time. Please go ahead and I will try to pull it up as you speak. Apologies.
D'accord. D'accord. Merci, Catherine. Oui, je disais que nous avons commencé notre travail par évoquer les tests juridiques. Nous savons que la protection de l'environnement est encadrée par plusieurs tests juridiques. Et dans notre contexte, le Cameroun a ratifié et a adopté plusieurs lois, plusieurs tests dans le but de s'arrimer aux contextes nationaux et internationaux dans la protection de l'environnement. Nous avons également présenté quelques définitions, la définition de quelques concepts qui nous permettra de comprendre réellement comment le changement climatique affecte les populations au Cameroun. Oui, je disais que le Cameroun a adopté quelques textes juridiques pour s'arrimer au contexte national et international dans la protection de l'environnement, à l'exemple de la loi de 96, la Convention des Nations Unies sur les changements climatiques, le protocole de Kyoto, l'accord de Paris, OK. Après les textes juridiques, prochain slide, justement, nous avons parlé des causes profondes des effets du changement climatique au Cameroun. Nous avons pu identifier quelques causes profondes de ces effets du changement climatique, en dehors des causes générales que nous savons tous qui sont la pollution de l'environnement par les gaz à effet de serre et d'autres. Dans notre contexte, nous avons pu identifier quelques causes. Et parmi ces causes, nous avons la gestion des déchets ménagers qui est très mal organisée au Cameroun. Nous pouvons voir en image 1 les dépôts d'immondices, qui est une image qui se trouve dans presque toutes les rues du Cameroun. En deuxième image, nous avons un drain, un cours d'eau qui est carrément bouché par les bouteilles plastiques, des eaux minérales et des bouteilles de boissons gazeuses. Ensuite, comme autre cause, next slide, nous avons la construction anarchique, nous avons la construction des habitations dans des zones interdites. Nous savons qu'au Cameroun, il y a des zones qui ne sont pas propices pour la construction des habitations. Et malheureusement, dans nos villes, nous rendons compte que les populations construisent dans ces zones, et ces zones qui sont généralement les bas-fonds. Et dès que les effets arrivent, comme les inondations par exemple, les populations sont obligées d'abandonner leurs maisons. Une autre cause que nous avons pu identifier, c'est la pollution atmosphérique. En image 3, en figure 3, nous avons là une image de l'incinération des pneus usés. Et ça, ce n'est qu'une image pour les pneus parce que dans le contexte camerounais, nous avons cette habitude que les populations aiment brûler les matières plastiques et sans tenir compte de l'effet que ces fumées, ces gaz carboniques ont sur l'environnement. En autre cause, nous avons la destruction des mangroves, qui est aussi un phénomène qui est très régulier chez nous. Et les mangroves qui ont un rôle très important dans les rétentions d'eau, qui peuvent avoir un impact sur les inondations. Malheureusement, ces mangroves sont généralement détruites. Nous avons également la déforestation et le non-reboisement. Et enfin, nous avons le système de recyclage des déchets plastiques qui est très embryonnaire dans notre contexte. Après avoir identifié ces quelques causes, nous avons également parlé des effets du changement climatique proprement dit dans notre contexte. Et nous avons pu identifier deux grands effets majeurs. D'abord, les effets sur l'activité économique. Nous savons que l'économie au Cameroun est basée sur le secteur agro-pastoral et les cultures vivrières, l'exploitation, les cultures vivrières d'exploitation, pardon, l'élevage, la pêche, la sylviculture, qui consistent les principaux piliers. Cependant, tous ces secteurs rencontrent d'énormes difficultés à cause des effets du changement climatique. Nous avons pris quelques exemples. Lorsque nous avons les pluies abondantes, en termes sur l'agriculture, nous constatons des attaques fongiques sur les feuilles de plantes qui contribuent à une mauvaise récolte. D'autre part, nous avons l'extrême sécheresse qui contribue à l'assèchement des cultures. Et les pluies abondantes et les extrêmes sécheresses ont un impact plus remarquable sur des personnes qui font de l'agriculture sur des surfaces inférieures à 5 hectares. Après, nous avons les érosions qui contribuent à la dégradation des sols arides et appauvrissent également le sol. Nous avons l'enclavement des voies d'écoulement des produits. Nous pouvons voir en image 4. Lorsqu'il pleut, les routes sont vraiment très désagréables. Et cette image 4 nous montre comment est-ce que lorsque ces routes sont dans ces états, il est très difficile d'écouler les produits de l'agriculture des zones rurales vers les zones urbaines, ce qui crée généralement la pénurie dans les zones et l'augmentation des prix. Et quand ces voitures sont bloquées dans ces états de route, nous assistons au pourrissement des cultures, des produits qui doivent être acheminés vers les villes. Et nous avons également les effets sur l'homme. L'effet majeur que nous avons dans notre contexte camerounais sur les hommes sont les inondations. On voit en image 5, A, B, C. Nous voyons les inondations et ces photos ont été prises très récemment. Ces photos ont été prises très récemment, principalement la journée de vendredi, sur la photo A, B et C. Les inondations également dans la ville de Douala, de Yaoundé, comme vous pouvez voir sur la figure 6. En A, nous avons la figure inondation à Douala et B. En 7, nous avons l'inondation au centre-ville de Yaoundé. OK. Next slide. Après ces inondations, nous avons pu montrer que les populations essaient de s'adapter face aux effets du changement climatique. C'est pour cela que dans notre contexte, les populations pratiquent l'agriculture par l'irrigation, l'agriculture par le drainage, l'utilisation des pesticides. Généralement dans l'Ouest Cameroun, le reboisement des espèces telles que le raffia qui permettent de retenir les eaux pour rendre humides les sols pendant les saisons sèches. Pardon. Oui, nous avons également comme adaptation le développement des activités parallèles qui permettent de s'adapter aux effets du changement climatique. Au Cameroun, nous avons le développement du commerce, des activités dans le bâtiment telles que la menuiserie et la maçonnerie. Nous avons les restaurants, dans le secteur du transport avec les motos. Toutes ces activités sont sont des activités qui permettent aux populations de s'adapter et de trouver des solutions comment dire, en fait, de s'adapter, de subsister en cas d'effet des changements climatiques. Concernant les adaptations au niveau des inondations, nous assistons régulièrement au curage des drains, parce que nous savons que les inondations sont souvent dues à l'encombrement des drains par les bouteilles plastiques. Donc, les populations régulièrement curent ces drains pour limiter l'effet des changements climatiques. Next. OK, après l'adaptation, nous avons pu identifier quelques recommandations. Nous proposons comme recommandation qu'il faut intensifier la sensibilisation dans les écoles. À l'exemple des écoles, on commence par les écoles de Douala et progressivement l'étendre dans tout le pays. Nous proposons également un accompagnement des agriculteurs en collaboration avec des experts agrométéorologiques pour réduire les effets du changement climatique sur les cultures. Nous recommandons également que les capacités des experts doivent être renforcées dans l'application des données météorologiques dans l'agriculture. Il faut également développer le secteur de fabrication du compost, qui sont des engrais bio qui pourront permettre aux populations, aux agriculteurs de réduire l'utilisation des engrais chimiques. Nous avons également la bonne gestion des ressources naturelles, l'amélioration de la gouvernance et la gestion stratégique du sous-secteur environnement, protection de la nature et développement durable. En termes de conclusion, nous pouvons dire que les changements climatiques ont un impact réel au Cameroun, tant dans le domaine de l'agriculture que sur les vies des individus. Les villes en souffrent avec la prolifération des déchets plastiques dans tous les coins de rue qui sont à l'origine des inondations dans les villes. Et avec l'accompagnement des structures de récupération et de transformation des déchets, les populations s'activent au quotidien pour s'adapter à ces effets d'inondation. Malheureusement, le manque de moyens financiers et matériels limite ces actions. Je vous remercie pour cette attention.
Bean, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm so glad that we got the technical issues sorted out so that we could see your very moving pictures. And your presentation highlights the interconnections between social issues, the environment, and climate so well. So thank you again very much. Our next panelist is Mapiwa Mangwiro Tsanga. Mapiwa is a member of WILPF's South Africa group. She holds a Bachelor of Laws and a Master's in Peace and Conflict Studies. Mapiwa is a trained lawyer and human rights advocate who is committed to advancing women's rights and gender equality. Currently, she is the Policy Development and Advocacy Manager for an international non-governmental organization based in South Africa. Mapiwa has also worked with many women's rights organizations in South Africa, where she has held various portfolios from researcher, legal advisor, to advocacy specialist. She also has expertise as a consultant, monitoring and evaluating the implementation of various projects for gender equality and human rights. Mapiwa, please go ahead.
Thank you, Tamara. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, depending on which part of the world you are. I'm just checking, are you able to hear Okay. So my presentation is really going to build on what has already been shared by my previous colleagues, previous speakers, around the gendered impact of climate change, and also zero in on the South African experience, some of the challenges that South Africa has experienced where climate change is concerned. Next slide, please. So as already been highlighted, climate change has become a global concern due to its adverse ecological, economic, and humanitarian effects that it presents. It destabilizes political systems, it undermines agricultural production, and it deepens poverty. This is particularly so in fragile contexts where climate change and environmental justice can lead to increased or renewed conflict. And I think my colleague Edwick did draw those parallels, the clear linkages between climate change and conflict. And so while climate change effects vary on different sectors of society, their effects are often interrelated. And climate change has a higher impact on those parts of the population that depend the most on natural resources for their livelihoods and who have the least capacity to respond to environmental disasters, which is the context and reality of most African countries. Next slide, please. So research has shown that agriculture is the economic backbone of many African countries, as it contributes 30 to 40% of GDP, as well as account for 60% of total earnings, while it employs about 70 to 80% of total labor force. And research has also shown that in Africa, women are the main producers of food crops such as maize, cassava, rice, while men are more likely to engage in commercial farming of produce such as cotton, cocoa, and coffee for export. And while agriculture plays such a crucial role in Africa, the African continent, particularly sub-Sahara Africa, is one of the regions most vulnerable to climate change and has inadequate adaptation activities. And I think some of the images that we also shared by Obin are showing some of the realities of how climate change is impacting on sub-Saharan Africa. Next slide, please. And so climate change is as much a human and social justice issue as it is not gender neutral. It affects women and men in their diversities differently, and because of the differential social positioning, it often leaves women more disadvantaged as compared to their male counterparts. In developing countries, women in rural areas often rely on natural resources as a critical source of sustenance and income for themselves and for their families. Yet despite being the key gatherers and suppliers of these resources, women often lack equal rights of ownership and control over land, property, and other assets. Women, as stated earlier on, are the primary producers of agricultural products and make the bulk of small-scale farmers, yet their participation in agricultural activities is faced with so many obstacles as they do not often own the land that they till to produce food, as in many instances, the land tenure systems are skewed against them. So you find that in most countries, land ownership revolves around men or male figures due to the patriarchal nature of systems. Yes.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you to tell you to speak a little bit more slowly for the interpreters? That would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Just take your time. We have enough time.
That's fine. I was just trying to be time conscious. Let me take it slowly. Thank you. Okay. So as I was still mentioning, and which is one of the issues that was raised initially also when Sylvie was opening, that we also have patriarchy as one of those structural systems that pose a problem when it comes to gender justice. And it also has adverse effects when it comes to issues around climate change. So you find that in so many instances, while women are the main producers of agricultural products, in particularly food that is consumed in their households, they normally face challenges because they don't often own the land that they till. And so their association to the land is often heavily dependent on their relationship with the male figures in their lives, which also tends to leave them in a very vulnerable space where their ability to produce is linked to the power dynamics that they are subjected to. And also women's and equal participation in decision-making processes also increases inequalities and often prevents women from fully contributing to climate-related planning, policy making, and implementation. So you find that this has already also been alluded to, that in most instances, you find that women are not involved in the decision-making structures, right from the local level where we have local decision makers, where we have traditional decision makers. These are very patriarchal spaces that are often where women are often excluded, and yet this is where some of the decisions around addressing climate-related challenges are made. And even if you take it to the highest level, to the COP space, and you check how the representation, you find that female or women's representation and participation is found wanting in those spaces, which is the general trend with the patriarchal nature of our societies, that women are often left at the margins and peripheries of decision making, which also then impacts on their ability to input into decisions that would address some of the limitations that they face. So when we then come to the South African context, you find that in South Africa, women make up a bulk of South Africa's agricultural workforce through commercial farming and subsistence farming. Yet the country has been experiencing climate shocks such as droughts, such as floods and locusts, which directly impact women's abilities to provide for their families. And South Africa has experienced many floods in recent years, particularly in a province called KwaZulu-Natal region, where you also find Durban, and also in the Eastern Cape regions. And currently the country is reeling, these two regions particularly are reeling from what is seen as the worst flood in the history of South Africa, with over 40,000 people affected by the rainfall, 435 people killed, while 55 were injured and 54 are missing. So what this has resulted in is that it has created more vulnerabilities for impoverished communities, which in South Africa are predominantly Black communities, as they have been the ones who have been more affected. And this is owing to historical, spatial, and housing arrangements, which were based on race and left many Black communities occupying flood-prone informal settlements, exposing them to higher risk of disaster. Next slide, please. So as severe floods wiped away people's sources of livelihood, plunging them into more extreme poverty conditions, the burden of providing food and other essentials to the family has fallen on women in this, particularly also if you're looking at the examples we have given of the KwaZulu-Natal region and the Eastern Cape, you find that research that was conducted following those floods indicated that women felt the burden of having to provide for food, of having to fend for the families during that period. And there were also safety issues because a number of people had to be moved from the flooding areas into community halls where they've had to sleep as men and women. And also we know that South Africa has got some of the highest statistics where gender-based violence is concerned. So women have not only found themselves vulnerable to food shortages, but also to the intersectional gender relations due to entrenched abusive behavior from male figures in their families, and even as they were seeking refuge in some of those places where they were trying to hide from the floods. And also a couple of years back, the Western Cape faced a severe drought, which resulted in what would have been known as the zero-day crisis, a day where almost 4 million people would have been left without water. This is a day where they had said if it gets to that day, the municipality would have to close the taps. Of course, the 0 day did not really happen because then they had to ration water and put all sorts of limitations around water usage. However, while the water crisis has had adverse effects for the region, due to the gendered nature of domestic work, women and girls have often bore the brunt of finding alternative sources of water, of being standing in long queues to try and get water from facilities where the government has placed facilities for people to access water. And they've been recorded incidences of gender-based violence where women have been abused, raped, and so forth. And also water scarcity has had an effect on their sanitary needs, thus posing a health threat for them. Next slide, please. And also, why then are we really saying a feminist perspective is key in addressing climate change? Because the reality is that while climate change affects men and women differently due to various reasons that have been highlighted above, including the gender inequalities amongst them, most of the interventions have not made such distinctions. And where distinctions have been made, women are mainly viewed as vulnerable groups to impacts of phenomena such as droughts, floods, heat waves, and in need of assistance. Yet women are not merely victims, but they are also in a position to offer solutions due to their knowledge of and leadership in sustainable resource management and leading sustainable practices in homes and community level. As has been alluded to, you find that women are the ones who are tilling the land, who are working mostly and interfacing with natural resources. And they've gathered the skill and the expertise in terms of how to come up with sustainable practices in that regard. Also, a feminist perspective is key as it is more inclusive and takes into consideration, into cognizance, the needs of vulnerable groups such as women and girls. And this is a perspective that challenges some of the structural drivers of climate change, such as militarism, such as capitalist systems, such as patriarchy. So this is a perspective that also goes to the structures and the drivers of climate change. Next slide, please. So what are our demands for governments, even as we head for COP27? I think as has been shown by research that from the World Inequality Database, the global North countries are responsible for more than half of all the emissions that have contributed to global warming. Privileged lifestyles in the global North produce a carbon footprint 100 times greater than that of the world's poorest nations combined. So this means that the global South has had a less equal share in the direct benefits of fossil fuel use, including energy consumption. As such, global North needs to take greater responsibility in addressing and mitigating the impact of climate change. And I think beginning also statistics were given in terms of how much they have pledged in addressing. Yes.
Sorry, just to remind you again to speak a bit more slowly so that everybody can follow you.
Oh, sorry, I had picked the tempo again. Okay. So as I was still highlighting that, we see that the global North has contributed the most to the emissions that have contributed to global warming, and yet their commitments to climate financing, climate adaptation, adaptation and mitigation initiatives leaves a lot to be desired. So they need to take a greater responsibility in addressing and mitigating the impacts of climate change. And they also need to be governments and specifically the global North needs to be more accountable in implementing climate change adaptation initiatives, and also to give space to communities from the global South who are at the forefront of climate change to be at the center of the world's climate justice and adaptation initiatives. The realities are that currently the narrative around climate justice, around climate change is being led by the global North and bringing in perspectives and initiatives that do not necessarily tackle the challenges that the global South is facing. And you find that voices from the global South are struggling to gain audience. Even researchers who are working on issues around climate change and climate justice who are from the global South struggle to get published, struggle to get audience as a result of the way that the space has been that has been predominantly occupied by the global North. So there is need to also acknowledge that and give space and voice to the global South to also lead, and particularly also to give space to women to also be able to lead in finding initiatives to address climate change challenges. Next slide, please. And also, there's a need to decolonize the climate narrative and initiatives to address it. That is, governments need to realize that the solution to the problems posed by climate change might lie in other perspectives, which do not necessarily belong to the same mindset that created them in the first place. So it means recognizing that climate change is a consequence of unprecedented acceleration in human production and consumption, mainly spearheaded by the global north. And it is to understand that modern ideas of economic progress that harm the environment and its people can no longer be considered the most suitable options for well-being of the earth. These need to be challenged. The issues, militarism need to be challenged. Exploitative capitalist systems need to be challenged. So there's need to then come to the point of realizing that in holding the global north accountable to changing the ways that they have been approaching the climate change issues and climate change challenges, because the same systems and the same oppressive systems and institutions that have been used to create these problems cannot be the same oppressive systems that are being used to try and find solutions as they continue to perpetuate inequality, particularly for the global South, which continues to be at the receiving end, yet it has contributed the least to the emissions that have led to the global warming. It also results in vulnerabilities where the global north comes with solutions that are tantamount to trying to recolonize the global south and continue to perpetuate that injustice that we're talking about. So there is a real need to decolonize approaches to addressing climate change and approaches to pursuing climate justice. And also key is the inclusion of women in decision-making and adopting feminist perspectives, as there is highlighted earlier. These are more inclusive. These are able to address or challenge the root causes and some of the drivers at the center of climate change. And also, citizens from the global north, this is an ask also from citizens from the global north, that we can speak to governments, what governments need to do, but also citizens from the global north need to rally with also voices from the global south and call for inclusivity in decision making, and also hold their governments to adopting economic initiatives that are less damaging, particularly in the global south, where some of the harmful extractive industries and processes are carried out by global north companies that are backed by their governments. And I think if it is, and this has also been shared by other colleagues who have shown and how the extractive industries are messing up the environment, and not only that, but they're not taking responsibility for addressing or fixing some of the environmental damage that is caused. If you look at the cases of such as the Niger Delta, it's really a painful experience where you see how global north companies have come and they've caused environmental degradation and environmental destruction in Africa, and they are held, the accountability that they are held to is very minimal in terms of addressing these challenges. So it is important that other citizens from the global north join voices as we call on governments across the globe, and particularly the global north, to be more accountable to engaging in less damaging initiatives. Thank you very much.
Mapiwa, thank you so much for your powerful, informative, and thorough presentation. We've heard loud and clear your calls and demands to hold the global north accountable, to give more space to women, and to have feminist and decolonial perspectives. Those are our urgent demands. Thank you so much. Our final speaker of our webinar is Ayo Ayola Amale. She is the president of WILPF Ghana, and Ayo is a conflict resolution professional and consultant. She has served in the role as an ombudsperson with broad experience working in law, conflict mediation, policy development, and peace building. Ayo is also a social justice activist. She has a wealth of experience promoting gender equality in civil society through the arts, participatory methodologies, advocacy, and training. Ayo, it's your turn.
Thank you, Tamara. Greetings, everyone. I won't have my video on because I have unstable internet. I hope I'm permitted to go on so that I don't have any issues with interconnectivity. Thank you once more. My presentation will be verging on, a lot has been said by my colleagues before me. I'll be talking specifically on the gendered impact of climate change, particularly relating to Ghana, where I am, and the gendered vulnerabilities and establishing the linkages of this. Yeah, so we know that feminist perspective is key in addressing any climate issue. Listening to previous colleagues spoke, we can see that you can't have climate justice without gender equality, obviously. There are ethical, just, and real obligations to include women, their real needs and perspectives and expertise in climate change negotiations, even in climate change discussions within national level. For example, in Ghana, women face increasing violence growing from food, lack of food, droughts, particularly up north in Ghana. We have a lot of drought going on now. Sometimes we have floods in most parts of Ghana due to climate change because the weather is changing, as we all know. So farmers cannot even predict what will happen next in the next harvest. So there's a lot of food insecurity, getting fuel sources, fetching water, and health problems due to gender bias and water insecurity from several severe weather. When we say severe weather, we're now talking about climate change that we've been talking about all along. So this change adds to women's sufferings and their poverties. One thing about Ghana is that women are very hardworking. The Ghanaian woman is very hardworking, and a lot rests on her shoulders as a household, the woman in the household. Yes, we have patriarchy. The man is king, so to say, in most societies, but there's a difference a little bit here because women here often take care of households, particularly the Ashanti woman. In Ghana, we have the woman being the head of a household when she's an Ashanti woman married to an Ashanti man. That's not too common in most African countries. So you find that the woman has a lot on her shoulders that she had to deal with. And coupled with these, there's so much poverty and so much sexual abuse too. So you have women suffering, a combination of patriarchy, the association of feminists with poverty and environmental degradation caused by the climate change. Yeah, this problem is even worse in communities where you find the men abandon the women because of this issue. There are some communities up north where the men have moved to other communities for grazing because they are cattle rearers. So they leave the women to cater for the household. The course of action and method that these women use to sustain the community speaks to the creativity the average Ghanaian woman has. The reality, the daily reality she experiences, it's better imagined. Fetching water due to scarcity, food shortages, having her girl child, the girl child stay back at home so she can go fetch water, so she can go fetch firewood, do the cooking, do the cleaning. And as a result, she ends up either earning bad grades in school or failing and being asked to leave, or dropping out outrightly because of poverty and neglect. So the effects are, you can see the relationship, how it is connected, the connectivity now. So everyday experience of women farmers, seed savers, and local women's rights, and their issues and their gender disparities can establishes this linkage to women vulnerability in adverse climate change in Ghana, particularly. I know that this is common everywhere, but I'm particular about Ghana now. So the importance of inclusion of women. Women are not just, they are not just vulnerable. They are people who have strength. They have knowledge, local knowledge of what can be done to curb some of this problem, because they are the ones who held the household together for years, for centuries, by the way. So women vulnerability to adverse climate change, their gender disparity in decision-making, and challenges like patriarchy, cultural beliefs, have denied them those equal opportunities to come out and share their knowledge, their experience, and the local ways and methods that they use to survive all this problem. So the rights of women, particularly, should be addressed if we want to, curb the issues around climate change. Most of these have been addressed by my previous colleagues, the rights of women and what they can contribute. So the bottom line is economic and social hierarchy are issues that should be looked at closely in Ghana. And we need political will to affect policy positively with regards to the difference in gender needs and responses. It has to be appreciated that there are different gender needs. There are different, there's a difference between how climate change affects the man and how it affects a woman, So that difference is what will speak really to the needs that we're talking about. So ultimately, we need to sustain inclusive peace, provoke a movement towards bold voices, choices for equal feminism and climate justice for women. So the Ghanaian woman is, so to say, a marginalized group like most women in Africa, especially looking at climate change. They lack resources of various types. They are portrayed as victims of development who carry the burden of survivor, as sustenance farmers. Their farming is limited because they don't even have access to land like the men do. So they have to fetch fuel wood as guardians of household to take care of food security, whereas the men, in contrast, are largely absent from this discourse. They're hardly visible. They choose to leave and go to other towns now in Ghana to either graze their cattle, especially up north. You have men who are cattle rearers, and they move away from that environment when there's drought, and they leave these women behind. So women vulnerability may indeed increase because of male absence, because men are migrating for survival due to climate change and livelihood shocks. They often end up in urban slums. We have them in Accra here. You see them, they come from the north. The young girls come, they are called Kayayes, and these are young girls with a bright future that has been stolen from them. They come here, they become headquarters. You find them in the market, and all they do is to help you carry whatever you've bought, and their life is snatched from them because there are no opportunities, because they are women. Some end up pregnant, and a whole lot of unpleasant things happen. So they have to survive due to climate and livelihood shocks, as I said. So they are working hard in poor living and working conditions. They often suffer health problems. They develop a range of health problems. In fact, it enhances male morbidity and mortality in the medium term, because this further enhances the care burdens on women. Because when men die, when they die and women become widows, then the burdens, because these women have large families, particularly the Ashanti woman usually have a lot of burden too, because she caters for the household, including the man. Interestingly, she caters for the man, she caters for her children, because she's said to own the children. Why the one up north, when the man leaves, migrates, she now becomes the head of household and she caters. And when he dies, because of poverty and too much stress, she takes over and the burden is upon her. So this major physical impacts of climate change have been identified in Ghana. There are temperature change due to climate change, change in rainfall and sea level rise. There has been report. Right now, it's even cloudy as I'm speaking. We can't even predict. I mean, sometimes the weather is unpredictable these days. So women suffer a lot because the longer, drier season is what we have now. The rainfall has reduced. And when there's rainfall, there are floods. So there are longer dry season and there are vanishing wet season. You have strong winds, and when there's rain at all, it's very heavy and it comes as floods, heavy floods. So women are more likely than men to be affected by climate change. As we all know, UN figures indicate that 80% of women. Yeah, I'm not speaking to the pictures yet, please. Katrin, thank you. I'm just speaking, I mean, generally about what women, I mean, the climate change effect on women and girls in Ghana and the impact. So women are more likely than men, going by what the UN figure indicate. 80% of people are displaced by climate change, and these 80% are women. And we all know the roles that women play. We know that women are primary caregivers and providers of food and fuel. And they are not even educated. Most of them are literate when it comes to the Western education of, I mean, knowing what climate change is and all that. Of course, they can interpret what climate change is locally. Of course, they know that something is changing, but not the way that we know it. They don't know what fossil fuels does. They don't know the effect like we do. So they need knowledge. They need to be educated in this regard. So as role givers and caregivers, as caregivers and providers of food and fuel, they are even made more vulnerable when there is flood and drought. And this is what we see. It's clear. This is what we see often now. So Ghana, the climate change in Ghana is impacting negatively on women, as they do not have control over resources. They don't have access to education. They don't have information, no equal rights and access to decision-making processes. As we know, women don't have, very few women are at the decision-making level in Ghana. Even though if you look at the other countries, Ghana is a bit better, perhaps, but not ahead of countries like Rwanda. So this impacts negatively on women, especially those in local communities who depend on the land for their survival. The implications of climate change on women in Ghana affects livelihoods. Like we have said, issues on water shortage, crop failure, and these women, how do they survive? They adapt to different strategies, like I've mentioned before.
Ayo,
they move towards, yes, please, Tamara.
Yes, I just want to be sure that you have time to show your visuals. So if you could wrap up in the next minute or two and make sure you go through your slides, that would be really great. But we don't have very much time left for our webinar, so I just wanted to ask if you could wrap up and show your slides. Those are beautiful pictures that you have. Thanks.
Thank you, Tamara. I'll round up by saying that climate change affects Ghanaian women like it affects most African women and most women around the world, because it's disproportionately affecting girls too in low-income countries like Ghana. Girls bear the brunt just like women do because of extreme weather. And it's taking them out of school, forcing them into earlier marriages and increasing their exposure to violence, just like the women are also exposed to violence. I'll stop here. I still have a lot to say, but I'll stop here. Thank you for the opportunity. And I would like to speak to the visuals that you can see being shared on the screen. Yeah. So we have symbols of environmental problems in Ghana. The first visual is just to show that we have a lot of tree felling in Ghana, and it's like a sword being directly used on someone's soul. You can see that there's a lot of problem with that. Women and men have been known to experience and handle energy-related issues differently. And this is due to gender roles. When you have trees being felled, you have logging. Of course, it's not only women who use this wood for firewood. Men also use, you have tree logging for furniture, for all sorts of things, for funeral, coffins, and a whole lot, where you find men work. So, but women use it a lot when it comes to energy-related issues, and they don't even know what effect it has on the environment and on them. So you have the different implements that women use. You have the tree there that has been cut. The next picture, that's the figure 2. You have a tree that has been cut down, and you have the cooking pots, the firewood, and the charcoal. These are terrible climate issues. Nothing grows here. And this is exactly what happens in local communities in Ghana. Even some urban communities, they use this for food. And it's very rampant here. Then we have the issue of yellow gallons in Ghana. When we say yellow, we're talking about like saying centuries of accumulated gallons that have been accumulated during the former presidency of President Kufuor. They had lots of water shortages around Ghana, and we had these yellow gallons imported into Ghana, and a whole lot of households had them. And when this issue was resolved, it became a climatic problem. And it's depicted here, and it's called Nature Through Cobwebs of Plastics, We Strangle Her. Of course, when you have water bodies soaked with plastics, you have drainage systems blocked with plastics, you are strangling nature, as it were. So that's what that picture speaks to, the plastic problem in Ghana. The yellow gallons, the sachet water, and we have issues around second used clothing that are as good as rags, blocking drainage and water systems. The next photo is a woman. Yeah,
I'm sorry, we have to end it there, because we want to at least get to have the panelists be able to answer one question before we wrap up. So we'll have to end it there. Thank you very much. And we are going to wrap up the webinar in about 8 minutes. We're going to pose just 2 questions to the panelists, and they can choose to answer which question that they would like. And we will give each panelist 1 to 2 minutes. It's not very much time to answer the question, but we will. We need to end the webinar soon. So there are 2 questions that came in that I would like to pose, and panelists, please decide which one you would like to answer. So the first one is, please discuss the way competition for resources between the Chinese, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, the United States has resulted in deforestation of the deforestation and the extraction of commodities from different countries in Africa. That's the first question. Another question to consider asking is on climate financing. And what are some of the local solutions to ensuring there's financing for climate adaptation? And let's take it another step and ask about what more can the global north do around climate financing to ensure that African countries can better adapt to the extreme weather events that many of you have outlined in your presentation. So I will give each person an opportunity to respond to whichever question they would like, to make any final concluding remarks. You have 1 to 2 minutes to end, and we'll go in the order that we began this presentation. So the first panelist will be Edwick, and then followed by Obin. Edwick, do you have anything to say to those questions?
Thank you so much, Tamara. I'll look at the question about the competition for resources between the countries in the global north and how that is impacting the environment in most African countries. I'll look at that focusing on how they are doing their activities. You realize that in most countries where there are natural resources, there are a lot of conflicts. These can be civil wars, you know, so if you look deeply at who is fueling those conflicts and to what end, you realize that it is that competition which we are talking about. And then I'll also look at it at how much is being spent on those conflicts by African countries, instead of African countries using their natural resources to adapt to the climate crisis which we are talking about. More money is being channeled towards conflicts, and conflicts that are being fed by countries that are benefiting from the natural resources. And then looking at Zimbabwe, you notice that we have Chinese investors in Zimbabwe, and their investments are contributing to displacements of indigenous communities where they discover diamonds and where they discover chrome. Even if indigenous people have been staying there for the past 500 years, they are displaced. So these are some of the challenges that are being faced by African countries as a result of the natural resources that are in their countries. So usually I regard that too as a resource curse instead of blessings for most African countries, because that competition is really impacting on African countries, and as a result, only the elite are benefiting from the extraction of those resources, to which the global north countries are fueling conflicts in the African countries so that they can siphon the natural resources from the African countries. So that's how I can respond to that question, Tamara. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I'll pass the mic over to Obin for any final answers or comments. Thank you.
Oui, merci. Je crois que la présentation de Tamara, les réalités qu'elle vient d'évoquer sont les mêmes au Cameroun. Généralement, l'exploitation des ressources naturelles crée des conflits. Mais à côté des conflits, je voudrais juste ajouter que l'exploitation des ressources forestières est encore un problème dans notre pays parce que nous avons une population qui vivent généralement même de ces ressources financières, de ces ressources forestières, pardon. C'est-à-dire que les populations utilisent les forêts pour le bois de chauffe, pour les constructions. Et lorsque ces pays étrangers viennent encore exploiter, et nous avons remarqué qu'après les exploitations ne riment pas avec le reboisement. Et ça impacte justement le changement climatique. Donc, c'est ce que je voulais ajouter à la suite de Tamara. Et à la dernière question de Catherine, j'aimerais dire que justement, les pays du Nord sont les principaux pollueurs et ils doivent prendre leurs responsabilités et selon le principe de pollueur-payeur, d'une part. Les pays occidentaux doivent accompagner les pays du Sud dans le transfert des technologies à travers l'amélioration à l'utilisation des énergies renouvelables, qui est l'un des moyens qui pourront permettre de combattre le changement climatique. Pourquoi pas contribuer à l'amélioration des techniques culturelles au niveau de l'agriculture, mais surtout nous accompagner dans la lutte contre les inondations, qui est un phénomène vraiment très grave. Ils doivent nous accompagner dans ce sens parce que nous avons vraiment besoin de prendre des dispositions pour la lutte contre les inondations dans nos villes. Merci.
Thank you very much. And Mapiwa, would you like to answer any of the questions or make a closing remark, and then we'll go to Ayo and end. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. I think I'll also pick on the issue around the competition for resources around between China, US, Germany, France. Those are the global north big brothers in quotes, and say that the reality is that this competition is really doing so much harm and damage to the African continent, and also particularly because there is no accountability. There is no, they claim, these competing countries, they claim that they are bringing in foreign investment, they are bringing in development, yet that development has left the continent depleted of its resources that are being exported out of the continent, that are not being used to develop the continent in any way. We have countries like the DRC. We know that the DRC does not know peace because of its resources, of its mineral resources, which are being plundered and being looted by global north countries. And also as China has entered the scene, we see that there's a lot of displacement that, as Edwick has said, communities are being displaced and moved from their homes and dwellings just for the benefit of these major powers. And yet little is given to Africa. And then they will come back and claim that they are giving aid to Africa. Yet if you calculate and look at what that aid amounts to and what is taken out of Africa through the illicit trading, through all these export of raw materials that are not even developed on the continent, through illicit financial flows. There's so many loopholes that are on the continent that are being used by these countries to siphon resources out of the continent, which are continuing to cause more damage and exacerbate climate change challenges and conflicts.
Thank you, Mapiwa. Ayo, for a final answer or a comment, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, thank you, Tamara. I would like to add to what has already been said regarding the West, but particularly Asia now, Chinese, because Ghana has a very serious problem with the Chinese. There are a number of Chinese citizens involved in illegal gold mining activity, and it has risen sharply in recent years. The last report suggests like 50,000 gold prospectors have left China for Ghana. And the problem is serious in the sense that it's affecting climate change, it's affecting livelihoods, and even land, because you have a whole lot of excavation going on, which are illegal, and local communities are suffering as a result. What's the meaning of this? You have Chinese come in and do mainly alluvial and shallow hard rock gold deposits that they go in there and dig illegally, and they use the local people to do this illegal mining, and you find that sometimes these people die underneath the ground for days, and no one knows what has happened. And they are accused of also defacing a vast tract of land in townships. I'm aware that there are townships like Wassa, Akropong, and Dunkwa, and dredging large sections of important rivers, such as the Pra or Fain. These are main rivers in Ghana. And this has caused a lot of impact to the environment, and widespread human rights abuses, which are, I mean, very, very troubling. And you have people dying, you have waters being polluted. In spite of all of this, you have them even buying lands from the locals. So I don't see the progress that the Chinese brings to these communities, except mayhem. And it speaks to so many other things that Chinese do all over Africa. And I think these are key issues that should be addressed. And I would like to add this to what has been said so that I don't take too much time. I'm just being careful with the time. Thank you.
So thank you so much to the panelists for those excellent answers and reflections. And thank you so much to all of you around the world that have listened in to our webinar today. Thank you very much to Sylvie, WILPF's new president, for giving our opening remarks. And I want to encourage all of you to get involved and join WILPF. Find a section in your country, and to also get involved in our environmental working group. I want to let you know that we are having a couple more webinars coming up in the next few weeks, and you will get a notice about that. We will be having a webinar on the climate impacts in North Africa and the Middle East. We will also be having a webinar that shines a spotlight on extractivism and militarism across the African continent and how that has worsened the climate crisis. So stay tuned for those details. And thank you so much for participating today, to the interpreters and to the technical staff at the WILPF headquarters. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Tamara. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much to everyone.